Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking ahead to this weekend's Miami Grand Prix. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined for what feels like it's been forever by both 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam, absolutely, yes, he's doing the piece, Coop, and the man, the myth, the legend. That is lead editor Ian Parks. Gentlemen, it feels like it's been a long time since I've been joined by both of you for a podcast. A very nice thing to start what is a very big week, of course, in Formula One, off to Miami. And we're going to start with something a bit different because in a bit of a rarity, we were just discussing this off camera. We all had the weekend off. It feels very, very bizarre. We're all very refreshed. I don't know when that's last happened. I found myself, for some reason, watching more sport than I normally do when there is an F1 weekend, which felt very, very weird. One event in particular I did watch, which was unbelievable, was the Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn boxing fight on Saturday night. There's a point I'm making behind this because Chris Eubank Jr.'s ring walk gave me goosebumps. It was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. And it got me thinking back to Formula One. What was the last moment in Formula One that gave you goosebumps, that made the hair stand up on the back of your necks? Hello, by the way, to the two of you. Sam, you can go first. What was your last goosebumps F1 moment?
My last true goosebumps moment in F1, I think, wasn't actually a positive one in many ways. It was more of a kind of trying to work out what was going on. Okay. Was Abu Dhabi 2021, if I'm being really honest.
Oh, here we go.
I want to answer
Get ready for the comments
positive.
below. Come on, then.
But this is the thing. No matter what side of it you fall, and I don't want to unnecessarily rehash well trodden ground, but there was that moment you go, wait, this isn't like, there was a level of the rules are being interpreted in a way we haven't seen before, and so there was that, there's something very odd going on. And so that's what the kind of is the initial reaction I'm talking about. But I mean, in an outwardly positive way, I mean, until the last corner of Max Verstappen's qualifying lap in Saudi Arabia in 2021, and then obviously put in the wall. But for me, the one that I always go back to, and I think this is the moment I truly fell in love with Formula One, was the final lap of the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix.
Oh, you bugger! But that's my line.
Oh, sorry. Okay, all right. I'll leave it there, and I'll let Ian talk about it.
Just goes to show, folks, we actually hadn't discussed it beforehand, we're all coming into this fresh, and that's mine, and I'll explain why that's mine. But you go ahead, Sam. Off you go, pal.
Well, no, it's just, I mean, I'll let you kind of elaborate on it, but it was just just how quickly it changed. This changing face of this, the weather was moving. That kind of that moment of. Just for me, Martin Brundle just being it was the line, wasn't it? It was is that Glock, and you just go, Glock. Like it's back in play. But for me, the take home was seeing the Ferrari garage and that moment of Felipe Massa's father being told, and it just is heartbreaking. And how gracious Felipe was in that moment as well on the podium. But anyway, over to you, Ian.
Yeah, I mean. Mine's from a journalistic perspective, of course, because I was actually there that day reporting on that Grand Prix. Very fortunate to reporting on that Grand Prix. I'd already watched Lewis go through hell the previous year, of course, in 2007, completely blowing that one with a 17-point lead with 2 races to go. And, of course, a Grand Prix win was worth 10 points. And that, for me, is one of the most iconic sporting moments I've ever covered in my career. And I've been very fortunate to cover some great events, some, World Cup finals, Champions League finals, boxing, World Championship boxing. And, for me, sitting there, and I was working for a company called the Press Association at the time. And pretty much like we do now, it's one of those where you have to get the race report in pretty much as soon as the checkered flag has dropped. And of course, for a minute, Felipe Massa was world champion. He'd crossed the line, he'd won the race, and Lewis was in a position where it looked like he'd blown it again. And then, of course, as Sam's just mentioned, that iconic Martin Brundle commentary. And I could feel my fingers trembling over the keyboard because, this was, I'm going to get slaughtered here, aren't I, by all the people that like to go on about British journalists commenting on British events, but don't care. For me, as I say, this was right up there with one of the if not the best thing that I've ever reported on in my entire career. This was me, a British journalist working for a British company, reporting about a British world champion. And it was just, it still sends, when I think about it now, it's still sending shivers down my spine because it was just, when you just think about it, that move on the last corner of the last lap of the final Grand Prix of the season to win a world championship. It doesn't get any better than that for me, not just as a fan, but just as a journalist, bearing in mind, bottom line, as a journalist, sporting drama like that, it rarely gets any better. So for me, that's why it's right up there. But we've given our perspective, Nick. Sam and I are both aligned. So I'm going to come to you, mate, because I don't know what yours is, in all fairness.
Well, there's obviously something quite magical about Sao Paulo, because mine is actually from last season's Sao Paulo Grand Prix, and the moment during the race when they switched to an onboard. I can't remember, it might have been of Lando, and it was when the heavy rain, I say that the more of a monsoon, it just fell. The circuit was in darkness. The drivers could not see, and you've got that feeling in your stomach of something bad is going to happen, because it was just diabolical conditions. Obviously, we then got the red flag and whatnot, but it was one of those moments where you couldn't quite believe what you were watching. You were literally watching Formula One cars still continuing to race in conditions more suited to jet skis. It was just something. It was just remarkable. And I think Sao Paulo always just seems to throw something up. Obviously, thinking as well to Max Verstappen's lap a couple of years ago when he started his final lap at the end of qualifying. You saw that huge dark cloud literally right over the circuit in what was one of the greatest of all time shots in Formula One. Just Sao Paulo, it will always be my favourite, I think.
Magical.
And of course,
it's
it is
a great circuit.
It is. And of course, for those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, let us know in the comments below, what was the last F1 moment to give you goosebumps, to make the hair stand on the back of your neck? And what's fascinating is, at least from us three, none of the moments fall from this season. And over my weekend off, I've been over this weekend off.
Yeah, it's been a while since
it's been a while.
You,
It's been a while. Well, I was also 8 years old on that race that you two both said. So it makes me feel very, very young all of a sudden. But what's interesting is,
does that make us feel very, very old?
I'm saying nothing. Okay, I will
to
not
be fair,
change
I was only 14. I think.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Anyways,
I was a little bit older, but I won't say how old.
Anyways, reading a lot of comments from last weekend on social media about the F1 season so far, and the general consensus seems to be that the racing itself hasn't been brilliant. Qualifying has been exceptional. We've had some really, really qualifying sessions for pretty much every single Grand Prix. But in the races this season, 4 out of 5 have been won from pole position. Arguably, it would be 5 out of 5 had Max Verstappen not been penalised in Saudi Arabia, given he had the pace to keep up with Oscar. And of course, actually, his pace was shown that he could have won the race if not for that penalty. It raises the question, though, because we came into this season expecting these remarkable battles between McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari, this really close title fight. Does F1 have a bit of a dilemma? Because it almost feels quite similar to 2020, 2021, where we came to the end of that regulation cycle and overtaking quite clearly became near impossible. I'll let you two decide who wants to take this, but are we in a similar position now where the regulations have gone on so far, the teams have reached, the peak of what they can do with these cars, that overtaking now, and in particular following another car, it is just not on the cards anymore?
Go for it, Sam. You go first.
I think there is an element of this kind of like this Icarus-like effect where flying too close to the sun, like the teams have all converged at such a high point, or at least the leading teams have converged at such a high point that it is then kind of nullifying the racing. And that's what you're seeing is they're too closely matched. We always thought, oh yeah, it's going to be so competitive. It's almost become too competitive, if that makes any sense. Like it's kind of gone over that kind of precise point you want, and it's now turned into a qualifying championship. I mean, the stats are remarkable in the sense that at the opening 5 rounds, only once has pole been more than a tenth of a second from second place, and then it was less than 2. I think that was Bahrain with Oscar. There was one that was 10 milliseconds. There was one that was 12 milliseconds. It has become a qualifying championship early in this season. So yeah, I think there is a level of that happens as normal. I think we are unlucky in some ways or it just is circumstance that it's happened in this way this time round, because obviously when you look back at 2020 and 2021, there were only subtle changes that happened between those 2 seasons that then brought Red Bull back into play. But you can also argue that actually what's worse, like a really dominant team like Mercedes throughout a regulation cycle, or now this where basically whoever gets pole wins. At least we have the fight for pole, whereas before you arguably didn't. So I think they're different, but in some ways the outcome is almost the same.
Ian, your thoughts?
It has been a fascinating season in some respects. As you said at the very start, Nick, we were expecting it to be such close racing between the leading teams. I certainly was expecting more variability in terms of the top 3, that's for sure. I mean, if you go through all the races, Australia was memorable for the volume of crashes that we had.
Yeah.
6 in 1 event. I can't even say 6 in 1 Grand Prix, because obviously Isaac Hadjar crashed on the formation lap to the grid. So I wasn't actually in the Grand Prix itself, but 6 on the Sunday at least. Then we had the 3 disqualifications in China, which made that interesting. And of course, we had Lewis Hamilton winning the sprint from pole, and we thought, this is it. Lewis is back. Yay. But no, definitely not. That's not happened. Japan was dire, as we all know. And then Bahrain was interesting, I thought, for a variety of reasons. And then Saudi just didn't kind of conjure the event that at least I've come to expect from it, being more incident laden than it compared to its previous few Grand Prix that race has been staged at the Jeddah Corniche circuit. So it's been a real mix of Grand Prix, but the fact that we've not had that level of fighting at the front that I was expecting, because when you look at the end of last season, McLaren was on that upward curve. Red Bull looked like it was just starting to come back with Max after it went through that major blip that last season where he didn't win a race in 10. Ferrari looked like it was definitely on an upward trajectory. And I think for me, they've been the biggest surprise and the biggest letdown, because I was fully expecting them to be right in that mix. And we've actually seen Mercedes come more to the fore than Ferrari. So with George Russell in particular, of course. But Mercedes is still just that peg shy of being a race-winning, pole-challenging car that you'd want to therefore then have all 4 of those teams vying for the race wins, because at the moment it's very much looking like this season is going in Mercedes' favour, unless one of the other teams conjures something with its upgrade packages, which we know are coming, but which we also know that is predominantly then going to be it after that one and only pretty much major package, probably at the start of the European Grand Prix season when we get to Imola, or maybe even later around Spain. But then that'll be that cut-off point, because everybody's going to be focusing on 26. So yes, the season for the most part has been a little bit of a letdown. There's been some great points. There's been some real low points, the entire Japanese Grand Prix being one of those, of course. And
Max's lap was pretty spectacular.
Yeah, it was. I'm saying the Grand Prix itself. Forget the pole position. I'm talking about the actual Grand Prix. Yeah, Max's qualifying lap, as we've said, was one of those for the ages. But yeah, it would have been nicer. It would be nicer. And hopefully we might still get a little bit of intrigue coming up, because otherwise if it just becomes an intra-team battle between Oscar and Lando, and maybe Max nudging them along the way here and there, then I think for the real, for any F1 fan, unless you're McLaren, it's not going to be a season to savour.
I do think there is something though in the kind of intra-team dynamic though as well. Like I think they can be fascinating. I just think that this season's probably going to hinge on that. And when Oscar's been up, Lando's been down, and vice versa for a lot of the year. In terms of, you look at Australia, just as it looked like there was going to be a fight on the hands, Oscar makes a mistake at I think it was turn 6, drops right off, and then the weather comes, and then obviously then he makes the really big mistake. And then, China, Lando just wasn't quite on his level, ends up separated between, with George, between the McLarens early in the race, kind of ruining any kind of chance of a fight between them there. Japan, they were stuck behind Max. Bahrain and Saudi, Lando, kind of fluffed it in qualifying. So I think that will be the key, is whether or not they can both end up in a position where McLaren are really tested because they're going, no, we want to race, and there's some kind of tension between the two of them.
With obviously, though, overtaking being so difficult, it's putting more pressure on the drivers not to make mistakes. And of course, the lead driver who has made the most mistakes is Lando Norris. And that's our first real major talking point, because in my eyes, he's the driver who the most eyes are going to be on in Miami this weekend. He came out of Bahrain going into Saudi saying that he needed a reset, could have done with a few days off. Well, he would have now had those extra few days off. Then he needed a bit of time to go back to the factory, look at the data, see how the car's been performing, see maybe how he can become more comfortable in the car. Is it fair to say, Ian, that the most eyes are going to be on Lando this weekend, given as well what happened in Miami for him last season?
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. And you've pretty much gone through all the major talking points surrounding Lando this season, because you look at the Australian Grand Prix at the start, and that was one small blip on one lap, pretty much faultless. And I remember saying at the time, when we did the podcast after that Grand Prix, that here we go, Lando has learned from everything that's gone on in his career. That was a Grand Prix where you thought prime for him to make a mistake, as we've seen from Lando in the past, and he didn't. He came through it with flying colours, deservedly so. Came out of it lead of the championship, and we thought, yes, this is going to be, or could potentially be, Lando's year. And since then, it's just not really gone for him, has it? We've seen these little errors that he's been prone to in the past, and they're costing him right now, and they're costing him more so against a teammate who has been absolutely on it, bar, of course, his one error, which unfortunately proved very costly in the Australian Grand Prix. Otherwise, that would have been a McLaren 1-2 in that race. And of course, Oscar ended up sailing off the track into the grass, only just managed to escape. That was brilliantly done, by the way, when you look back at that again, the way he managed to get off the grass and get back into the race and at least scored a couple of points. Those points could be invaluable come the end of the season. Who knows the way it could ebb and flow between those two drivers. But right now, of the two, given the way that Oscar has looked cool, calm, composed, unflustered, says the right things, even if you think it's dull, but at least he's not putting his heart on his sleeve. And don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing against Lando Norris in saying that, because I actually admire him for being open and upfront and laying everything out there. I think that's very brave, what he does, very notable way in which he attacks things and just tries to get things off his chest. But Lando right now needs to find his A game, because he's B- right now, these past few Grand Prix. He absolutely needs to go back to the Lando that we saw at Melbourne's Albert Park if he really wants to challenge Oscar for this year's world title.
A quick question for you two as well, whilst we're on the topic of Lando. Do you know what Lando Norris and Bruce McLaren have in common?
Other than they both
apart
drove
from the
for
fact
McLaren?
they've driven for McLaren.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
And that brings an end to the you two. Right. I can't believe you both said that at the same time as well. What do they both, apart from racing for McLaren, what do they both have in common? I can't believe this.
They've only Lando or Oscar?
Lando. What do Lando and Bruce McLaren have in common, with the exception of both driving for McLaren?
Their first names both have 5 letters in. As does Oscar's.
Oh, this is...
Oh, you know what?
Stop.
Sam, that's
I
just
put all this time into
level.
I put all this time into planning these podcasts only for Sam to go to counting letters.
It's because I don't know.
Shall I just say it?
It can't be Grand Prix victories because...
because I was saying that.
Oscar's on 5 as well.
I was going to say a Grand Prix victories, but
I will put you out your misery. Lando and Bruce both claimed their first F1 win in Florida. Lando, of course, in Miami last year. Bruce won his first F1 race in the 1959 US Grand Prix at Sebring, which of course is in Florida as well. So a nice little stat. Apart from the fact,
it's a fun stat.
Apart from the fact that they both drove for McLaren, and apart from the fact that, as Sam rightly pointed out, their first names both have 5 characters. Thank you, Sam Coop, everybody. Right, moving on very, very quickly before I end this podcast after just 21 minutes. Sam, we've spoken about Lando, of course, and the fact that all the eyes are on him because of the mistakes he's been making. He's a driver who very much needs to rediscover some confidence, a bit of swagger in his driving. If you look at the other side of the garage and we talk about this interesting battle, Oscar has made one mistake, as he pointed out, all season. And that was, of course, in Australia, where obviously he span off, ended up finishing 9th, which cost him in the end 16 points because he would have likely finished second. That would have put him with a 26-point lead rather than a 10-point lead, but of course, all very hypothetical. Oscar is the driver at the moment, you've got to say, with the most confidence on the grid. That's then a fascinating dynamic when you've got on one side of the garage in Oscar, the championship leader, full of confidence, and then on the other side of the garage, you've got Lando, who knows that he's got to find what his teammate has in order to beat him.
It's a brilliant dynamic, because I think we seldom see such kind of stark contrast between teammates in just how they operate, also where their levels of confidence are at any given point. I think the confidence will ebb and flow for both of them across the year. I think Lando's peaks and troughs are much more pronounced, and this kind of cuts to the real differences between them as people and as drivers. Oscar's, as we've discussed before, far more kind of metronomically consistent. He will just be like, this is me, this is my baseline. And that's how he brings that level of performance. Where Lando needs a little bit more kind of, I don't know, like, zhuzh, to kind of really get him kind of going. And sometimes it's negative, sometimes, and
zhuzh.
Yeah,
we'll put that in our thumbnail over the video, see how that does.
Yeah.
Well, we can discuss how we spell it as well, because who knows? It's one of those words you never really write down, is it? But I think Lando said himself that negative, it's almost this cathartic kind of, I'm getting this off my chest. I need this to motivate myself. This is what draws the best out of me, is being brutally honest with myself, even in front of a microphone. So what is fascinating is this dynamic, and it's actually kind of, will it win out? Which side will win out across the season? At the moment, it looks like the really consistent kind of approach is winning, but it's almost, you could distill it down to kind of tortoise and hare-like in some ways, whereas Oscar is the tortoise and Lando is the hare.
But of course, what it's all doing, though, with one McLaren driver not being dominant this season, is it's allowing, of course, a certain Max Verstappen to still have a chance this season, despite the issues going on at Red Bull, despite what are clearly some difficulties with the RB21. It's certainly an improving car. I think that was definitely on display in Jeddah. And of course, we go into a circuit at the Miami International Autodrome, where, of course, he has had so much success, would have won last season by a country mile had it not been for that safety car, of course, helping Lando. And that's got to give Max surely a bit of confidence that this circuit this weekend in Miami, he is so good at, he is so dominant at. If the Red Bull is at least working at 60% this weekend, you've got to think Max is going to be right up there.
2023, was it, where he came from 9th on the grid and beat his teammate, Sergio Perez, had started on pole?
Well, that was the beginning of the end for Sergio, wasn't it?
That was the beginning. That was the absolute beginning of the end. Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth there, Sam. That was the beginning of the end for Checo, because I don't think he ever recovered from that. thank heaven Max is still in it. Because intra-team battles are great. We've had some great ones over the past. Don't get me wrong, but I do like to see a bit of rivalry from other teams as well. So for once, I'm actually grateful that Max Verstappen is still in this fight, because I'm hoping he can continue to give the McLarens a good run for the money. Bless you, Nick. He just sneezed off camera, folks.
Thank you.
It's been a tough season, tough start to the season for him, bar that Japanese Grand Prix, which he didn't put a wheel out of place. And once again, we've seen Max performing above and beyond the level of the car for the majority of the season, which is something that we know he's supremely capable of doing, as we saw for the majority of the second half of the last season. As I mentioned earlier, when he went on that big long run of Grand Prix without a win, which was unreal for him, because bearing in mind what we've come to expect from Max Verstappen previously. We do know there's going to be more upgrades coming on that Red Bull. We've got some coming for this weekend in Miami, and then we know the bulk of that upgrade package is then going to be on the car, the RB21, for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in Imola, the first of that triple header, the first Grand Prix of the European season. So then we're going to get a really good idea as to where Red Bull is at, where that RB21 is at. Will it be a car that will allow Max to challenge for the rest of the season, or will McLaren just have too much over the course and they're constantly going to be this edge ahead of their rivals? So fingers crossed. For me personally, as I say, I'd love there to be a season-long battle between the McLarens and Max. I think that would be superb for the sport. Give us a lot to talk about as well on our shows and our updates, and give the fans, even for the neutral fan, well, predominantly for the neutral fan, of course, if you're not Max fan or if you're not McLaren fan, something to really sink their teeth into for Formula One this season, because as we discussed at the start, there has been a lack of, I'm going to use Sam's word, zhuzh, so far. Bar the odd moment here or there, bar the odd pole position, the odd overtake. Predominant at the front, of course. There's been plenty going on in the midfield, as we've seen. It's been great battle across the midfield. Let's just get into that for a couple of seconds, because from Haas, Williams down, even Stake have scored some points, which they didn't do until the 23rd race of last season, I think it was. So there's something. So they're giving us something from Team 5 downwards. Who's going to pick up the wooden spoon? Who's going to be best of the rest behind the leading four? So there's something there. But yeah, as I say, I want to be entertained, and I want to see good Grand Prix racing. And at the front, we've not quite got that. So I'm still hoping that's to come. There's still plenty of time to go. We've only had 5 of 24. There's 19 races to go yet.
What's fascinating, though, is that where we've now had, as you point out, obviously we've had 5 races. We've just come out of a triple header. All the teams have had a week off to look at the data in the factories, have conversations with their drivers. The likelihood is, you would imagine the majority of teams, at least in the leading outfits, have had a good look at what McLaren are doing in particular, obviously, given that they seem to have the best race pace consistently, and of course have claimed pole position 3 out of 5 times this year. And Sam, that for me is a very interesting point. I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts on it, because this is going to be a weekend now where maybe we start to see what some of the teams have learned from this week off by looking at what McLaren have been doing in their data.
Yeah, so I think realistically, it's not just kind of what McLaren did, it's kind of when they did it that as well last year that is governing what we'll see in the next few rounds. They almost kind of surprised people last year with the Miami upgrade, because as you mentioned, Imola, the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, the start of the European season, has always been the traditional point that you'd port your first kind of substantial upgrade. McLaren kind of beat everyone to it last year and won a race. So I think you will see a fair amount of changes. I don't know if we're going to see very kind of McLaren heavy from the start of this year, because we know McLaren have changed quite a lot of things. It's quite a tight turnaround for teams. A lot of these updates will have been in the works over winter. So it might be the kind of the second half of the the run into the summer when you start seeing stuff that's directly informed from the start of this season. And then that is almost like a kind of, right, this is what we think is the approach, and this is it. This has to work. Otherwise, we've got to then just go, look, this is the year, and we've got to move on to 2026. So there's an interesting dilemma there for a lot of the teams. And I mean, take Red Bull, for example. If my memory serves me correctly, they ported upgrades at Imola last year, and that was kind of the start of the real issues that they had. And that's, we've heard about the correlation stuff, and that's been the case for a while. Christian's kind of talked about that, Christian Horner. But they brought in development to Imola. That Friday, they had a dreadful Friday. And that was the first time we kind of thought, oh, wow, this really is, they're struggling. Max, being Max, pulled it out. The race victory was just exceptional that weekend. You can't escape that. But I think you'll see some teams bring development to that stage, and they might get it slightly wrong. Almost this Ferrari-esque. Do you remember from Spain last year when they just went, oh, we've gone down the wrong route with this, had to unwind the whole thing. So you're going to see a lot of that. So I don't know if Miami is the critical kind of weekend in that sense. I think that was probably more likely Imola 2 weeks after. But I do think you will see some shift, and definitely teams would be kind of wise to look at what McLaren are doing, because they have shifted over the winter. And we thought it was a real big risk, to be fair, given how Red Bull did the same thing the year before and it all went wrong. It'll be interesting to see what turns up in Miami.
One team who need a major shift in the right direction, Ian, is of course Ferrari, and in particular, of course, Lewis Hamilton. Charles Leclerc has been driving the wheels of the SF25. Finally claimed a podium, of course, in Saudi Arabia, but on Lewis's side of the garage, he's been very dejected, of course, in the media pens. He's just been struggling with pace, struggling to get comfortable with the car, of course. We had the comment a few races ago about how everything at Ferrari and the car is so alien for him because of what he became so used to and accustomed to over at Mercedes. This is now a point of the year where, yes, we have Miami. We then, of course, have another week off, but then we have the European season, and the rounds do just come so quickly. Ferrari need to really start picking up some results now, in particular on Lewis's side of the garage, to get anything out of this season.
Yeah, Ferrari for me has been the biggest disappointment of the season, and not just Lewis Hamilton, just Ferrari as a team, because when you think as to how they came out of last season, as I said earlier, on that upward trajectory, and for me, I thought they were going to be the team that was really going to take it to both McLaren and Red Bull. And I was unsure what to expect of Lewis. I knew it was going to be a major change for him. And as I said, that victory from sprint pole in China, I thought that was going to be a real turning point, and it just hasn't been. It actually has. It's been a turning point for all the wrong reasons. I was expecting the turning point and him and Ferrari to then move upwards, but it's just not been the case. They've barely been at the races. They've pretty much been an also-ran, even behind Mercedes. Well, certainly behind George Russell of Mercedes. Kimi Antonelli is still getting up to speed. He's still a young guy at the end of the day. And he's still forging his path at Mercedes, learning his way. And yes, whilst we appreciate Lewis is still learning an awful lot within that team, nevertheless, you would have assumed his experience would have helped overcome certain deficiencies compared to a young guy like Kimi, who's fresh into Formula One and is learning the ropes pretty much from scratch, apart from all that historic TPC mileage he did, of course. But nevertheless, yes, a major disappointment from Ferrari. And surely there has to be more to come. Surely there are going to be upgrades on that car that are going to help them turn that corner and deliver the performances that I was fully expecting of that outfit, bearing in mind the way they finished last season. And it's just not materialized. Really hasn't. So a major surprise, a major disappointment. Come on, Ferrari, get your act together. And hopefully, I mentioned to you as well, guys, and I've said this to many other people that I've spoken to before. For me, and I'll repeat it again. I've always seen this season as that learning one for Lewis at Ferrari. That this is the last year of the current regulations. We know he's struggled with these regulations. So for me, this year for Lewis should be all about learning about the team, learning about the people within the team, learning how to get the best out of the people around him within the team. And then next year, when we have this regulation change, hopefully the car will be better suited to Lewis and he can then get more out of it. If it isn't, if he can't, then I think that next year might very well be Lewis's last in Formula One.
And it feels like a lot of next season also depends on the rumours and reports of just how good Mercedes are looking for the new power unit regulations. And we know what they did in 2014 when, of course, the turbo hybrid was introduced. And from current rumours, it sounds like they're building a bit of a rocket ship for next season. But that leads on really nicely to the last talking point, Sam, and the driver that Ian mentioned there, George Russell. He's been a bit of an unspoken of star, it feels, this season. Has very much gone under the radar, has been there when the McLaren drivers have been squabbling or when one of them haven't been at their best, in particular as well, when Max hasn't been at his best or the Red Bull has been struggling. George is another driver who is very much, to a certain extent, somewhat of a title outsider should the McLarens keep going over themselves and making errors. He's really taken that leadership role left by Lewis Hamilton by the scruff of its neck. He is doing a remarkable job.
He is. He's the unsung hero of the year, as you kind of pointed out. What's fascinating, though, is hearing George talk about that when, he's been asked kind of, do you feel like you're being slept or not overlooked in the title fight? And his response was, well, for starters, I don't need to seek external validation, which is exactly the kind of confidence you'd expect from someone who gets to the pinnacle of their trade. You don't get there if you're not, kind of ridiculously kind of self-assured in what you can do. And yeah, he basically was like, I don't care, it doesn't matter. But the fact that he is staying in that fight is fascinating. Pre-Saudi Arabia, I think he was only 13 or 14 points off the championship lead. It's grown because he had an off weekend by comparison to the rest of the season by finishing fifth, or at least slipping back from third on the grid, is probably a more accurate read. But he's still 26 points adrift. Like, he's still very much in it. And what's fascinating is that there's this narrative around how he's made this huge step and he's really kind of flourished over the winter. And he's almost taken a little bit of umbrage with that. And he said it himself, I don't think I've made that much of a step. I had to compete week in, week out with a 7-time world champion for my first, few seasons at Mercedes, and I beat him over 2 years. I think I saw a quote somewhere where he kind of said, you could argue that if Mercedes were really competitive, or had I joined Mercedes earlier, I'd be a 2-time world champion by now because I've beaten Lewis twice across the course of the season. So there's certainly that self-belief, clearly. And I think he feels that he hasn't made as big a step. I think for me what it is, because I agree with that. I think he was operating at a high level last year. And that's where my kind of, as we've mentioned it before, my prediction that he would win the championship this year, as tongue-in-cheek as it was, that's kind of the root of that. But I think for me, the biggest thing is how he's just taken on the mantle of team leader. He's just stepped into that role effortlessly. And he's taken Kimi under his wing, and he's like, and that's a really difficult thing for him to do if you look at the wider landscape, because Kimi is his competition for a seat in some ways because of Max Verstappen kind of looming on the periphery and those kind of ties and speculation between Verstappen and Wolff and Mercedes. So you could look at that and go, well, surely Russell feels like I've got to beat Kimi as well as Max for a seat. So yeah, he's really kind of flourished in that sense. And I think that's been the real kind of take home for me with him. He's been fantastic on track. He's been really consistent. And yeah, it's difficult to get a read on if he's outperforming the W60 because he's 3 or 4 tenths quicker a lap than Kimi is, which is no slight on Kimi. He's 5 races into his career. So it's difficult to know if he's outperforming the car, but you can certainly make the argument he's getting the absolute maximum out.
Yeah, absolutely.
A very good answer to lead us into the final part of this week's podcast. And it is, of course, our predictions, which I am the top of the RN365 predictors leaderboard. A quick message to the fans. I need one of your predictions. So if you could please comment below, if you're watching this on YouTube, who you think is going to claim pole position, the fastest lap, the fastest pit stop in terms of which team, and the top 3 of the race for Miami this weekend. What I will do is the same I did a couple of weeks ago, where I took whichever fan commented their predictions first, and then you'll be representing the fans for the Miami Grand Prix. So make sure you get commenting below. Ian, you can go first this week.
So, pole position, it's hard to look beyond a McLaren, isn't it? And given the way Oscar Piastri is driving that car, I'm going to go Oscar. Fastest pit stop, I'm going to ride the Ferrari train, continue, because they've
doing
just
very,
been
very well.
superb. They are doing very, very well. So hopefully get another point for that. Fastest lap. This is always the intriguing one, isn't it? Because we know it's the variable. I'm going to
punt, isn't it?
go. It's just a punt. This one is just a punt. Fastest lap. I would like to think on this occasion, I'm going to go Max Verstappen. There we go. And then top 3. I'm going to go Oscar, Max, Lando. We're struggling now, aren't we? Because it's really hard to look beyond those top 3. Maybe throwing George into the equation and barring an incident, this is the way Formula One's gone, isn't it, this season? I'm almost tempted to throw in another category at some stage just to add another variable, but I'll leave that one for another day.
Well, I'm just saying, I know I'm leading. Maybe that's why another variable if that's what's needed to beat me, then I think that's a bit unfair. Is that Oscar
a mid-table change might be coming in, yeah.
For the Spanish Grand Prix, we'll be introducing a brand new category. So is that Oscar in first or Oscar in third? Just so you know, just in case there's no wiggle room for you to get around that. Is that Oscar P to finish first in the race?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, just to clarify, in case Oscar finishes third and Lando wins and Ian comes on saying, no, I should get more points for this. I get it. I'm going to go for something a little bit different, given I have got a 3-point lead at the top of the championship. I'm going to say Max Verstappen pole position. I think he's just so good in Miami, and I've got a feeling, Max on pole. I'm going to say Lando fastest lap. I'm going to go Red Bull fastest pit stop, because they seem to last year always have it. This year they've not. It feels like it's just a matter of time. They're now going to have another pit stop problem probably now. I've predicted that. I'm then going to say Oscar third, Lando second, and Max for the win. I'm backing a Max win and a Max pole this weekend. Sam, bring us home.
Yeah, I mean, that takes real courage, Nick, to take the strategy that got you to the summit and then throw it out. That's pretty brave. But
so what are you doing your P1?
Well, I mean, you've got to adapt to stay ahead of the game. For me, pole. You know what? I'm going Lando. I'm going. Come back.
Something
come
different.
Back,
good.
Lando, come back. That's all different.
Yep.
I think pit stop. I've tried to be countercultural and say McLaren for the last few weeks, and it hasn't worked. I'm falling in line with Ferrari. I'm doing it. I'm selling my soul.
Do you know what? I really hope McLaren now gets the fastest pit stop. That'd be brilliant.
I would be. It would be so painful. But that's why I stuck with it for so long, because I'm like, it just can't keep on happening. Fastest lap, I'm going Charles Leclerc. Why not? I'll choose one of the 20. I'm just rotating with fastest lap, and then victory. Lando, Oscar, Max. Lando win, Oscar second.
Okay.
Third.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified that, because you're the kind of person I put down to try and find some wiggle room, some points, because you are lost.
That is really
I should point out. Well, you are lost.
A slur.
You are lost, and you know what?
Desperate
times call for desperate measures. And on that note,
I don't need to win that badly.
Well, I think we need. I think we need some form of.
Reaction last year when we lost that quiz.
The quiz. we need to think of some kind of forfeit for whoever loses this. We've got another 19 races to decide that. But anyways,
when I'm competitive, I'm competitive. So like when I'm good at something, I'm competitive. If I'm not good at something, I don't. Maybe that says a lot about me in terms of my mindset. But I'm clearly not competitive at this game. So I'm just here for a fun time.
Sam's waiting.
Yeah, we're not about competitive. You're just not very good.
Sam's waiting to be 20 points behind before trying to pull off the biggest comeback of all times. I reckon that's where we can see the hat come on. This has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. For those who are watching on YouTube, please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel. Ian and I will be with you in Miami this weekend for the F1 updates, but of course we'll be back next week to discuss the Miami Grand Prix in the next episode of the podcast. To everyone, enjoy the Miami Grand Prix this weekend. From Sam, Ian and I, see you later.
Take care, folks. See you in Miami.
Thanks for joining us.